I'm just letting out the most massive, exaggerated sigh right now. Seriously.
Oh boy, I could literally hear you practically banging your coffee mug against the desk over there. What is going on?
I am just so incredibly annoyed. So yesterday, I made this fatal error. I spent exactly 3 minutes looking at a stunning pair of sneakers online.
Oh no, I know exactly where this is going.
Right, and I didn't even add them to my cart. I didn't even click to look at the sizing chart. I just looked at the main image, and now that ad is just stalking me across every single app on my phone, like some kind of out-of-body spirit.
That's the classic retargeting trap.
It really is. I mean, I go to check the morning news, and there are the sneakers. I open a work portal, and the sneakers are literally floating right there in the sidebar. It is this deeply frustrating, suffocating feeling of just, being controlled by an algorithm.
Yeah, that invisible hand just nudging you.
Exactly. Pushing me, nudging me, just completely wearing down my cognitive bandwidth until I almost gave in and bought them right before we started recording. It feels, I don't know, incredibly violating. But anyway, before I completely lose my mind over shoes, let's get official. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, no matter what time zone you're in. Welcome back to Sip and Talk. I'm Sunny.
Hi, I'm Joe. And to all our Sip and Talkers out there tuning in, we have a truly mind-bending conversation lined up for you today.
But let me drop a little paradigm-shifting thought right here at the top of the show.
Okay, lay it on me.
A piece of code, probably written in some Silicon Valley server farm a few years ago. But long before tech companies existed, long before the internet, or even electricity, our brains were hijacked by a much older, far more entrenched algorithm.
One that is encoded right into the base pairs of our DNA. Evolutionary biologists refer to it as the selfish gene. I mean, you think a sneaker company's retargeting ad is manipulating you. Your own biology has been running a background program on you since the very day you were born.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, pulling physiological strings you didn't even know existed.
I am so glad you brought that up, but I want to, stop right there for a second, because that immediately paints a picture in my head that is vividly creepy.
Creepy how?
Well, when you say biological background program, my mind goes straight to the jungle, specifically the Ophiocordyceps fungus.
Ah, yes. The zombie ant fungus.
Yes. If you haven't seen the nature documentaries on this, it is deeply, deeply unsettling. Basically, a tiny fungus spore falls onto an ant foraging on the jungle floor. It uses an enzyme to literally melt through the ant's exoskeleton, and then it grows inside the ant's body.
Which sounds like a standard parasite, but it gets so much weirder.
Right. Because here's the crazy part. It doesn't eat the ant's brain. It physically weaves itself through the ant's muscle fibers, essentially severing the brain's connection to the ant's own legs.
So the ant is just trapped.
Exactly. The ant is still alive, still completely conscious, but it is trapped in this meat suit that it no longer controls. And then the fungus forces the ant to leave the safety of its colony, climb up a plant stem to exactly 25 centimeters above the soil, bite down on a leaf with a literal death grip, and just wait to die.
Because that specific height is the optimal environment.
Yes. The absolute perfect humidity and temperature for the fungus to burst out of the ant's head and shower contagious spores onto the colony below. And the thing is, the ant probably thinks, wow, I really want to climb this leaf right now. But it is entirely controlled by this parasitic passenger.
It's a terrifying visual, but an incredibly accurate analogy.
But so what does this actually mean for us? Because suddenly I am wondering, how do I know if the desire for this cup of coffee I am holding right now, or the urge to buy those sneakers, is actually me choosing it? Or is it just some ancient bacteria or selfish gene pulling the levers in my head?
Honestly, that is the most important question a modern human can ask. And it is a completely valid fear to have. Today's conversation on Sip and Talk is going to be a massive, comprehensive debugging journey for the brain.
I am so ready for a firmware update.
We all need one. We're taking a look at a whole stack of biological research, behavioral psychology, and cognitive science, and we are going to extract the ultimate toolkit. Our mission today is to figure out how to stop being a puppet of our own biological hardware.
So moving from the default settings to, developer mode.
Exactly. We are going to map out how to become the ultimate system administrator of our own minds. We really need to figure out exactly who or what is actually in the driver's seat of your life.
Becoming the system admin of my own brain. I genuinely need that because right now, with these sneaker ads, I feel like I am logged into my own life as a guest user with, zero permissions.
Yeah, just view-only access.
Right. So let's dive into this first layer. You mentioned the selfish gene earlier, which points straight to Richard Dawkins' groundbreaking theory, this idea that we are essentially just survival machines.
Right.
Walk me through the mechanics of that, because before Dawkins, didn't science generally assume that evolution was all about the survival of the species as a whole?
Yeah, exactly. For a long time, the prevailing heuristic in biology was this idea of group selection. The assumption was, animals did things for the good of the herd or the good of the species. But when Dawkins published his work back in the 1970s, he flipped that completely upside down.
How so?
He argued that if you look at the fundamental bare metal mechanics of evolution, this species is completely irrelevant. Even the individual organism is secondary.
Wait, really? So what is the primary driver then?
The fundamental unit of evolution is the gene itself. Organisms, and yes, that includes you and me, are just incredibly complex, highly engineered vehicles. We are temporary survival machines built by genes for one single ruthless purpose.
Which is just making more genes, right?
Exactly, to ensure those specific genes survive long enough to replicate into the next generation.
So we are essentially organic mechs. We are these fleshy, complicated getaway cars driven by microscopic pilots. And those pilots don't actually care about the car at all once the payload is delivered.
That is the brutal, unvarnished truth of the biological algorithm. The genes do not care if you, the vehicle, are happy. They do not care if you feel fulfilled or if you achieve some higher level of self-actualization. They literally only care about replication.
Oh, that makes me think of, what is it, the salmon?
Yes, perfect example. Think about certain species of Pacific salmon that literally rot alive and die immediately after spawning. Or the male praying mantis that is eaten by the female during mating.
Right. The individual organism is completely destroyed, but the system works because the genes successfully replicate.
Exactly. Now, humans are obviously far more complex, but the underlying firmware is the exact same. Your genes will actively push you toward behaviors that ensure their survival, even if those behaviors make you absolutely miserable in the modern world.
That is incredibly humbling. It's a massive hit to the human ego, honestly. But, it makes logical sense. If we are going to figure out how to override these microscopic pilots, we obviously need to understand the hardware they built for us.
We have to pop the hood.
Right. And the human brain isn't just one simple processor like a laptop CPU, right? It is built in distinct layers. I know there is this concept of the triune brain, the three-layered brain model. And I know it is a bit of a simplification of modern neuroscience, but structurally, how does this help us identify the puppets inside our heads?
It is an incredibly useful functional model, actually, because it perfectly reflects our evolutionary history. The brain wasn't just designed from scratch all at once. It was built in layers over millions of years.
So kind of like adding new floors to an old building without ever upgrading the foundation?
That is a brilliant way to look at it. The deepest, most ancient layer is the hindbrain and the brainstem, which is often called the reptilian brain. This includes structures like the basal ganglia. And this layer, it operates entirely below the level of your conscious thought. It governs raw, unfiltered survival.
Okay, so what does that look like in daily life?
Well, when you feel a sudden, violent spike of anxiety, or an overwhelming wave of hunger, or raw reproductive drive, or that paralyzing fight-or-flight response that is the reptilian brain taking the wheel.
And it has literally no concept of the future, right? It just wants what it wants right this second.
Zero concept of tomorrow.
Like, it's the part of my brain screaming at me to eat the entire box of stale donuts in the office break room. Not because I'm actually hungry, but because the reptilian brain thinks we are still foraging on the savannah and, winter is coming. It literally thinks we might starve to death by Tuesday.
Precisely. To the reptilian brain, every single dense calorie you encounter is a literal life or death scenario. It does not understand the concept of a grocery store, let alone a diet plan. It demands instant gratification because, in a primal environment, delaying gratification usually meant you got eaten by a predator or your food got stolen by a rival.
Okay, so that's the base layer. What's next?
Then, layered directly on top of that ancient core, we have the limbic system, which is often called the mammalian brain. Now, this is where things get significantly more complicated. When reptiles reproduce, they generally lay eggs and just walk away. But mammals nurse their young.
Right, they need a pack.
Exactly. They need social bonds, attachment, and tribal structures to survive. So the limbic system evolved to govern emotions, memories, and crucially, social hierarchy.
Okay, so this is where the amygdala and the hippocampus live. This is where, like, feelings of jealousy come from, the deep-seated need for validation from our peers, feelings of anger when we are socially slighted, and that overwhelming, sometimes crushing desire to just fit in with the tribe.
Yes, and understanding the limbic system is the absolute key to understanding modern behavior. Think about it, in a hunter-gatherer tribe of maybe 100 people, being socially ostracized didn't just mean you were a little lonely on a Friday night.
Right. It meant you lost access to shared food and fire and protection.
Exactly. Social death meant literal physical death. So your limbic system treats social rejection as a mortal threat. It releases stress hormones like cortisol when you feel judged, and it rewards you with oxytocin and serotonin when you are accepted by the group.
Okay, here is where this gets terrifyingly relevant for me, especially living in this highly connected digital age. This limbic system, this mammalian need for tribal validation, feels like the exact vulnerability that modern social media platforms exploit.
Oh, 100%.
Like when I post a photo and then obsessively check to see the likes rolling in, or when I feel a pang of genuine jealousy seeing someone's highly curated vacation photos, that is not my logical brain making a rational assessment of my life. That is my ancient mammalian brain panicking about my status within this massive digital tribe.
It's treating a lack of likes like a survival threat.
Yes. It is terrified that if I don't get enough engagement, I'm going to be pushed out of the cave and left to fend for myself in the wilderness.
You are hitting on the exact mechanism of the attention economy. Tech companies understand the limbic system far, far better than we understand it ourselves. They have completely weaponized our biological need for tribal validation. They created algorithms that trigger variable ratio dopamine rewards, which, by the way, is the exact same psychological mechanism used in casino slot machines.
So they're literally hacking our mammalian brains. That is so wild. Oh, wait, there is a third layer, right? What sits on top of the mammal brain?
Finally, wrapped around all of this, we have the outermost layer, the neocortex, or the cerebral cortex. This is the newest part of the brain, evolutionarily speaking, and it is absolutely massive in humans compared to other animals. The neocortex is the seat of logic, abstract thought, morality, long-term planning, and the ability to delay gratification.
Oh, so it's the part of the brain that looks at the sneaker ad and says, hey, maybe don't buy those because rent is due next week and you already own 4 pairs of shoes.
Exactly.
It's the adult in the room.
It is the adult in the room, yes.
Right.
But there's a critical flaw in this hardware design. The neocortex requires a massive, massive amount of metabolic energy to run. I mean, the human brain makes up only about 2% of our total body weight, but it consumes 20% of our resting metabolic energy.
Wow. So it is an absolute energy hog.
Huge.
Yeah.
So your body, being a highly efficient survival machine designed to conserve calories, wants to keep the neocortex powered down as much as possible. It vastly prefers to let the highly energy-efficient reptilian and limbic brains handle the day-to-day driving on autopilot.
I hear what you are saying about the hardware, but I want to push back on this a little bit.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because it all sounds very neat in theory, right? The lizard wants food, the mammal wants friends, the logical brain wants to pay rent. But experientially, inside my own head, it doesn't feel like 3 distinct voices arguing. It all just feels like me wanting things.
It feels seamless.
Exactly. If this biological hijacking is happening seamlessly behind the scenes, how do I actually tell the difference between my genuine, authentic goals and a biological algorithm just trying to trick me?
That is the exact challenge of being a modern human, because the limbic system is incredibly good at disguising its raw desires as rational thought. It will actually recruit the neocortex to invent logical-sounding excuses for why you should eat the donut or buy the shoes.
Oh, like, I had a hard week. I deserve this.
Exactly. That's the limbic system hiring the neocortex as its PR firm. So we need a diagnostic tool to cut through that. We need a practical mental litmus test to determine who is actually submitting the request.
Okay, lay it on me. What is the test?
Here is how you do it. When a strong impulse arises, you must force a pause and ask yourself this specific question. If I strip away the immediate emotional reward or the immediate physiological pleasure, does this action still serve my long-term goals?
Oh, I see. Okay, let's apply that litmus test to my sneaker scenario this morning.
Let's do it.
So the impulse is to click buy. The emotional reward is the sudden rush of dopamine, the thrill of acquiring a shiny new object, and maybe my limbic system's anticipation of looking cool in front of my friends and elevating my social status.
Right, the mammalian reward.
Right, so if I strip all of that away, if I completely remove the dopamine hit and the imaginary status boost, does buying another pair of shoes serve my actual long-term goal of, say, saving up for a down payment on a house? Absolutely not. It actively harms it.
Exactly.
So that urge isn't the real me. It's the survival machine seeking a quick chemical hit.
Boom. You've just successfully debugged that specific impulse. You recognize that the selfish gene doesn't care if you are financially stable next year. It only cares about the chemical reward right now. By applying that litmus test, you force the neocortex to power up, evaluate the data, and take the steering wheel back from the limbic system.
That makes total sense, and it is so empowering to frame it that way. But it also leads us perfectly into the next major problem. We've established how our DNA drives us, the physical hardware, the brain structures, the hormones, but there is an entirely different layer of control happening at the same time, isn't there?
There is, yes.
It is not just our biological hardware, it is our software. The ideas, the mental shortcuts, and the cultural programming we just absorb by existing in the world.
Yes, the software glitches. And honestly, these can be far more insidious than biological drives because they completely disguise themselves as your own rational thoughts. This starts with the concept of heuristics.
Heuristics, right, mental shortcuts.
Exactly. As we just discussed, the neocortex burns massive amounts of glucose to think critically. So, to survive without starving, the brain evolved heuristics, which are essentially rules of thumb or cognitive generalizations to save energy. Instead of analyzing every single complex situation from scratch, the brain relies on past experiences to make split-second judgments.
It is literally like the autocomplete function on your phone's keyboard. Your brain sees the first two letters of a situation and just fills in the rest of the word so you don't have to type it out.
That is a perfect analogy. And in the ancient world out on the savannah, cognitive autocomplete was highly efficient. If you saw rustling in the bushes, your ancestors didn't stop to calculate the wind speed, the trajectory, and the statistical probability of it being a leopard versus a strong breeze.
Right, they didn't run the math, they just ran.
They just ran. The heuristic rustling bush equals danger kept them alive. But in the highly complex, nuanced modern world, these rapid-fire mental shortcuts manifest as dangerous cognitive biases. They create what psychologists call cognitive tunnels, where we only process information that fits neatly into our pre-existing patterns, and we completely ignore the broader context.
I see this constantly, especially with the sheer volume of information we deal with daily, which actually brings up something I think is a modern epidemic. Cognitive debt.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the world we live in is not a savanna with occasional, easily identifiable threats. It is a constant, unending barrage of notifications, emails, breaking news alerts, and social media demands. The chronic stress of this environment elevates our cortisol levels and puts us in this permanent state of cognitive debt.
We are just completely overdrawn.
Exactly. We are forcing the brain into a low-energy, rigid autopilot mode. We are so overwhelmed and exhausted that we rely entirely on those heuristics because we literally do not have the metabolic energy left to boot up the neocortex and think deeply about anything.
And when you are living in that state of cognitive debt, operating purely on System 1 heuristics, your psychological immune system is completely compromised. You become incredibly vulnerable to the next major threat to your autonomy,
which is
mimetic parasites.
Memes. And let's be extremely clear for the listener here. We are not talking about the funny picture of a cat with bold text over it that you send to your group chat. We are talking about the original academic definition of the word meme.
Right. Richard Dawkins actually coined the term meme in that exact same book, The Selfish Gene. He needed a word to describe a unit of cultural transmission that acted analogously to a biological gene. A meme is a cultural parasite.
Like an idea virus.
Yes. It is an idea, a catchphrase, a fashion trend, a religious concept, or a political ideology. And just like biological viruses, ideas want to survive and replicate. They spread from brain to brain through communication. Now, some memes are benign or even helpful, like the idea of washing your hands before surgery, but others are highly destructive.
This brings us right back to the cultural fungus concept. Because certain ideologies act exactly like the zombie ant fungus.
They really do.
Take extreme consumerism, for example. The idea that your inherent worth as a human being is directly tied to the luxury brands you own. Or look at the echo chamber outrage we see online, where the entire goal of the community is just to be as intensely angry as possible at whatever the other side is doing today.
Just manufacturing outrage.
Right. These ideas hijack our minds. They use us to spread themselves. They can literally convince people to sacrifice their own financial well-being, destroy their real-life relationships, and totally ruin their peace of mind just to propagate the ideology.
It is the exact same mechanism as ophiocordyceps. The mimetic idea infects the host's mind, rewires their limbic priorities, and makes them climb to the highest digital soapbox they can find to spread the spores of that ideology to others, even if it completely isolates and destroys the host's actual life in the process.
I think of it like downloading sketchy freeware on your laptop. You think you are just getting a free video editing tool, but it secretly installs a crypto miner in the background.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
Yeah, it is running your CPU at 100% capacity, draining your battery, slowing down all your actual meaningful work, and you don't even know it's there. You just wonder why your cooling fan is so loud and your computer keeps crashing.
Meanwhile, the software is just mining away.
Exactly. But here's the thing. If I am the computer, what is my diagnostic dashboard? How do I actually know that an idea I hold dear has parasitized my brain? Because nobody thinks they're in a cult. Nobody thinks their own deeply held beliefs are a virus.
That is a crucial diagnostic step because a successful parasite masks its presence. It makes you think it's part of you. But the ultimate warning sign of a mimetic parasite is cognitive rigidity.
Cognitive rigidity. Meaning what, exactly?
If an idea or a belief system makes you entirely narrow-minded, if it strictly forbids you from questioning its core tenets, or, and this is the most important part, if it strips away your basic human empathy for people who do not share that specific idea, you are dealing with a mimetic parasite.
Wow.
Because healthy, robust ideas can withstand intense scrutiny and debate. Parasitic ideas demand blind obedience because their survival depends entirely on the host not thinking critically. If an ideology requires you to view a group of other human beings as fundamentally less than human or inherently evil simply for disagreeing with you, your limbic system has been hijacked.
If it strips away your empathy, it is a parasite. That is a heavy, almost uncomfortable standard to apply, but an incredibly necessary way to look at the media we consume and the beliefs we hold.
It's the only way to stay objective.
Okay, so we have thoroughly mapped out the enemy here. We see the strings of the puppet master, both the biological hardware drives of the selfish gene and the mimetic software parasites infecting our cognitive debt. We know the problem. How do we actually cut the strings? Or better yet, how do we rewrite the operating system entirely?
Well, that brings us to the OS rewrite. And honestly, this is the most hopeful, empowering part of our conversation today. It's understanding that the brain is not rigid like a silicon microchip. It is highly malleable. It physically changes its own structure based on how you use it. This is the biological reality of neuroplasticity.
Neuroplasticity. The concept that our brains are more like wet clay than poured concrete. They can be molded, shaped, and fundamentally rewired by our experiences, our environment, and even our recurring thoughts.
Exactly. And the foundational mechanism of neuroplasticity is known as Hebbian theory, formulated by Donald Hebb back in the late 1940s. The common catchphrase for it is, neurons that fire together, wire together. And conversely, use it or lose it.
So it's about forming physical connections.
Right. When you repeatedly have a certain thought or you react a certain way to a stimulus, the physical neural pathways in your brain actually change. The axons and dendrites form tighter connections, and they are wrapped in thicker layers of myelin sheathing. Myelin acts kind of like the rubber insulation on an electrical wire. It makes the signal travel faster and more efficiently. The behavior essentially becomes a cognitive superhighway.
Okay, let me make sure I understand the physical reality of this. If every single time I feel stressed at work, I immediately open a social media app to doom scroll for 10 minutes. Oh, wait. I mean, if I do that, I'm not just forming a bad habit psychologically, right?
No, it's structural.
I am literally physically laying down myelin in my brain to associate the biological feeling of stress with the motor function of pulling out my phone. I am paving a multi-lane, high-speed neural highway between anxiety and scrolling.
You are building the exact physical infrastructure that keeps you trapped in the loop. The brain makes that pathway incredibly efficient to save energy. But because of that exact same neuroplasticity, you have the power to tear up that highway and pave a new one. The brain will prune away pathways that are no longer used. We just need to apply the right debugging tools to stop using the old roads.
Okay, let's open the toolkit. What is our first practical method for interrupting that superhighway? Because willpower alone clearly isn't enough when the road is already paved.
The first tool is called effect labeling, or simply labeling the emotion. It sounds almost too simple to work, but chemically and neurologically it is profound.
Okay, how does it work?
When an intense craving, a spike of rage, or a wave of anxiety hits you, you must vocalize it objectively. Instead of saying, I desperately need those sneakers, or I am so angry at this email right now, you step back and you label the biological process occurring in your body. You literally say out loud or write down, oh, my limbic system is currently releasing dopamine to compel me to click that ad. Or my amygdala has perceived a social threat and is initiating a fight or flight response.
You know, I have actually tried a version of this in therapy, and it is weirdly, shockingly effective.
Really? Tell me about that.
Yeah. By forcing myself to name the exact mechanism, it instantly shifts the power dynamic. It takes me out of the subjective, overwhelming experience of being swept away in the rapids of the emotion and turns me into an objective observer sitting on the riverbank. But why does that work? Why does just saying my amygdala is firing actually make me less angry?
It comes down to how blood flows in the brain. Brain imaging using fMRI has shown exactly what happens during affect labeling. When you are caught in a raw emotion, the amygdala is highly active and consuming oxygen. But the moment you force yourself to find the precise language to describe the emotion, you are demanding that the brain boot up the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex.
Which is the logic center.
Exactly, it's the language and logic center. So blood physically flows away from the emotional center and into the logical center. You are using the processing power required for language as a physical brake pedal on the limbic system. It's like turning on the lights in a dark, scary room. Suddenly, the terrifying monster is clearly just a pile of laundry on a chair.
You are forcing the neocortex to turn on, which starves the amygdala of the energy it needs to keep panicking. That is brilliant.
It's a great biohack.
But what if the chemical spike is just too overwhelming? Labeling the emotion makes sense, but what if the dopamine urge is so intense that I can label my desire for a giant slice of pizza all I want, but I am still going to eat it because it's sitting right there in front of me? What is our fail-safe?
That is when we look at the physical limitations of the brain's chemistry, which brings us to the second tool, the 10-minute buffer zone.
10 minutes.
Yep. Biological impulses, especially those driven by catecholamines like adrenaline or intense dopamine spikes, have a relatively short biological half-life within the synaptic cleft. They are designed for immediate, explosive, short-term action, like running from a predator or grabbing a piece of fruit.
So the urge to impulse buy a massive TV on sale, or the urge to send a really venomous reply to a coworker's email, or the urge to eat that pizza, those feelings feel all-consuming in the moment, but structurally, they're fragile.
Very fragile.
The body physically cannot sustain that level of chemical intensity for very long because it's toxic and exhausting.
Exactly. The enzymes in your brain, like monoamine oxidase, are constantly working to clear those neurotransmitters away and return you to baseline. So you hack the system by simply stalling. You force a mandatory 10-minute wait before acting on any sudden, intense urge.
And what does that 10 minutes actually achieve?
It gives the slow, energy-hungry neocortex the necessary time to fully boot up and review the application submitted by the primal brain. The reptilian brain submits an urgent, flashing red request. Consume sugar immediately. The neocortex takes 10 minutes to review the file, cross-references it with your long-term health goals, realizes the enzymes have already cleared the dopamine spike, and calmly denies the request. By simply waiting, you outlast the chemical half-life of the urge.
That is incredibly practical. Setting a literal 10-minute timer on your phone when you feel triggered could save you from so many catastrophic life decisions. Okay, so labeling and buffering handle the biological hardware spikes. But how do we debug the software side? How do we root out those insidious cognitive biases and mimetic parasites that have already set up shop in our minds?
That requires a much more active approach to how you consume information. We use adversarial reading and the premortem. The biggest vulnerability in our software is confirmation bias. That's our brain's deeply hardwired tendency to only seek out, remember, and value information that already agrees with what we believe. It is the ultimate energy-saving heuristic. To fight it, we must intentionally practice adversarial reading.
I want to make sure we explain this clearly because this is a really tough pill to swallow for a lot of people. Adversarial reading is absolutely not about going onto social media and getting into bad faith arguments with internet trolls, right? That just spikes your cortisol.
Oh, no, absolutely not. That's just noise.
Adversarial reading is about intentionally seeking out highly authoritative, well-researched, intelligent sources that fundamentally contradict your own worldview. So if you naturally lean left politically and your daily media diet consists entirely of progressive outlets, you force yourself to read the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal. If you naturally lean right, you force yourself to read the left-leaning equivalents with an open mind.
Precisely. It's about breaking the filter bubble.
And I want to add, as hosts of Sip and Talk, we maintain total, absolute political neutrality on these issues. We are not endorsing any viewpoints here. We are not saying one specific side is objectively right. We are just saying that only ever reading one side guarantees you are living in a cognitive tunnel. We are simply trying to convey the ideas in the data.
Exactly. It is about intentionally breaking the echo chamber. Cognitive dissonance. The uncomfortable feeling of holding two conflicting ideas physically feels bad because your brain treats contradictory information like a threat to its established neural pathways. You have to push through that discomfort. You don't have to agree with the opposing view, but you must understand the underlying logic of how intelligent, well-meaning people could arrive at that conclusion. It builds cognitive flexibility and immunizes you against mimetic parasites.
And what about the second part of the software debugging, the pre-mortem? I know this is a concept developed by cognitive psychologist Gary Klein.
Yeah, it's brilliant. So we usually do post-mortems in the business world after a project fails, right?
Yeah.
You sit in a boardroom and try to figure out what went wrong after the money's already gone. But a pre-mortem flips the timeline.
It's like prospective hindsight.
Yes. Before making any major life choice, taking a new job, moving across the country, launching a startup, or even getting married, you sit down and vividly imagine that it is exactly 1 year later, and you imagine that the project or the decision has failed completely and utterly. It is an unmitigated disaster.
I love the mechanics of this. You don't ask what could go wrong. You state as a fact, the absolute worst case scenario has already happened.
Right, and from that imagined future of total failure, you work backward to figure out exactly why it failed. What were the specific missteps? What obvious blind spots did you willfully ignore? Because our brains suffer from an extreme optimism bias regarding our own plans, the limbic system suppresses negative information when we are excited. The premortem bypasses that excitement. It forces the analytical neocortex to actively hunt for flaws that the emotional brain is trying to hide.
It is basically doing rigorous quality assurance testing on your own life choices before they go into production. That is a brilliant way to bypass the optimism heuristic. And that leads us to the final debugging tool for our software. First principles thinking.
First principles thinking is about stripping away all inherited traditions, all analogies, and all the assumptions that sound like, well, this is just how it has always been done. You aggressively boil a situation down to its most fundamental, undeniable truths. You look at a problem and ask, if none of the current solutions existed, how would I build this from scratch today based only on the laws of physics or absolute logic?
You hear this mental model brought up constantly in the tech and engineering spaces. It is exactly how electric cars became commercially viable again.
How so?
Well, instead of looking at the incredibly expensive existing car batteries and asking, how do we tweak this to be 5% cheaper? First principles thinkers completely threw out the existing designs. They looked at the periodic table of elements. They identified the fundamental atomic elements required to store energy like lithium, nickel, and cobalt.
Right, they broke it down to the base materials.
Exactly. They calculated the raw material cost on the London Metal Exchange, and they realized that the fundamental materials were actually cheap. It was the legacy manufacturing processes that were expensive. By building from the ground up, they bypassed the lazy heuristic of, we must do it the way it's always been done.
And the beauty is, you can apply that exact same engineering mindset to your personal life. Why are you in your current career? Is it because you actually love the fundamental day-to-day atomic tasks of the job? Or is it because you got a degree in that field 10 years ago and the heuristic of sunk cost fallacy is keeping you trapped there? First principles thinking cuts right through the mimetic programming and societal expectations.
Okay, so we have built an amazing, robust set of debugging tools today. We know how to label our emotions to shift blood flow. We use the 10-minute buffer to outlast chemical spikes. We read adversarially to break echo chambers. We run pre-mortems to beat optimism bias. And we think from first principles. But debugging is ultimately just system maintenance, right?
Yes, it's just keeping the lights on.
Right. If we really want this biological machine to run smoothly and powerfully, we need to install a fundamentally better operating system. We need structural thinking.
That is the ultimate goal. We need to build a mental lattice. This concept was heavily popularized by Charlie Munger, who was one of the greatest structural thinkers and investors of our time. He argued that you cannot rely on just one narrow academic discipline to understand the immense complexity of the real world. There's an old saying, to a man with only a hammer, every problem looks like a nail.
Classic.
Right? If you only have one mental model, you will torture reality to fit it. You need a lattice of mental models drawn from all the major disciplines.
Because reality isn't divided into neat little university departments. A complex business problem isn't just an economics problem. It is simultaneously a human psychology problem, a mathematical probability problem, and sometimes even an evolutionary biology problem.
Exactly. Munger said you need to synthesize the critical mass of fundamental disciplines. You need the physics models of critical mass, momentum, and entropy. You need the evolutionary biology models of adaptation and the selfish gene we just spent an hour discussing. You need the psychological models of incentive structures, operant conditioning, and cognitive biases. When you hang your practical knowledge on an interlocking lattice of these different models, they reinforce each other and create what he called a Lollapalooza effect, a massive confluence of understanding.
Let's make this concrete for the listener. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the severe blind spots we suffer from almost always occur at the boundaries of disciplines.
Okay, give me an example.
Let's say you are deciding whether to quit your stable corporate job to join a risky tech startup. If you only use an economics model, you just look at the potential equity payout versus your current salary.
Right, just running the numbers.
But if you use a mental lattice, you look at the physics of it. Does the startup have enough momentum and capital to reach escape velocity before it burns out? You look at the biology. What are the raw evolutionary survival motivations of the founders I'm joining? Are they cooperative or predatory? You look at the psychology. Am I falling for the grass is greener bias, or is this genuinely a better incentive structure? Cross-disciplinary thinking is the ultimate antivirus software for the brain.
It really is.
Yeah.
It prevents any single mimetic parasite from taking over because you are constantly cross-referencing your ideas against the fundamental laws of physics, biology, and human nature.
It's such a powerful framework.
It is, but we have to acknowledge a harsh reality here. Even with the best mental models, even with a perfect lattice, relying entirely on your neocortex and your willpower to make good decisions every minute of the day is a losing game. The brain gets tired. The neocortex literally runs out of glucose. This is why the final, and perhaps most important, piece of the OS rewrite is environmental design.
Yes. This is where we bring in the brilliant logic from James Clear's work in Atomic Habits. The absolute fastest way to rewrite your brain, to leverage that neuroplasticity we talked about earlier, isn't to just sit there and think harder or try harder.
Thinking hard burns precious calories.
It does. Willpower is a depreciating asset. The fastest way to change your behavior is environmental design. If you want to change your cognitive output, you have to radically change your daily information input.
The environment always wins in the end. I mean, if you keep junk food in your pantry, you will eventually eat it. Doesn't matter how strong your willpower is on Monday morning, you will eat it on Thursday night when your cognitive debt is high, you are exhausted from work, and your prefrontal cortex is completely offline. You have to design your physical and digital environment so that doing the right thing is the path of least resistance, and doing the wrong thing requires an immense, annoying amount of effort.
Exactly. You engineer friction. You want to stop feeling inadequate. Unfollow the accounts that trigger your limbic system's jealousy. You want to stop buying sneakers. Delete the shopping apps from your phone entirely.
Make it hard on yourself.
Right. Make it so that if you want to buy shoes, you have to physically get off the couch, go to a desktop computer, type in a complex password, and navigate a clunky website. You are adding high friction to the bad habits and removing all friction from the good ones. And a massive part of that environment design is setting up external navigation, what behavioral psychologists call implementation intentions, or if-then strategies.
To protect yourself from your own known biological blind spots, you write external rules for yourself before you ever enter the danger zone. You preload the decision so your neocortex doesn't have to burn energy debating what to do in the heat of the moment.
So practically, this means I need to make decisions before I'm actually compromised. Give me a concrete example of how I program an if-then strategy into my daily life.
Okay, let's say you know your limbic system struggles with isolation. Your if-then rule is, if I feel lonely late at night, then I will immediately go to the gym, or I will open a specific book, but I will absolutely not open a shopping app or a dating app.
Yeah.
You have objectively identified the biological trigger loneliness, which is a mammalian limbic system alert, and you have hardwired a pre-approved, healthy, productive response.
So it's automatic.
Exactly. When the trigger inevitably happens, you don't have to sit there and debate what to do. You don't have to rely on willpower. The rule is already written.
It is literally like programming a macro or an automated script for your life. If condition X is met, automatically execute script Y. That takes all the processing pressure off the emotional brain.
And that, ultimately, is how you become the system administrator of your own mind. You aren't just reacting helplessly to the software notifications anymore. You're actually writing the code that dictates how the system runs.
You know, as we wrap up this conversation today, I am just marveling at this entire realization. We started this hour looking at a somewhat grim, deterministic reality, the idea that we are essentially just survival machines, fleshy meat vehicles driven by ancient, selfish genes, incredibly susceptible to cognitive biases, and vulnerable to cultural parasites. We are so much like the zombie ants climbing the leaf, completely unaware of what is actually steering us.
It's a heavy thought.
It is. But here is the ultimate beautiful rebellion in all of this. Out of all the millions of species on this planet, human beings are the only creatures on Earth capable of looking at our biology and saying no to our own genes.
That is the defining characteristic of human consciousness. We have the unique capacity to observe our own biological imperatives, analyze them, and actively choose to defy them.
We invent birth control, completely separating the biological drive for sex from the genetic goal of reproduction. We choose to stay single to pursue art, science, or career ambitions. We fast for higher religious or philosophical ideals, literally telling our reptilian brain's desperate demand for calories to shut up and wait because we value an abstract concept more than our immediate survival instinct. That is absolutely incredible.
It is the ultimate triumph of the neocortex over the selfish gene. So I want to leave the listener with a crucial metric, a final provocative thought for you to mull over as you navigate your life this week. Look closely at your daily habits and ask yourself, is your current behavior, the media you consume, and the impulses you indulge in shrinking your options?
Yeah.
Are you acting like the hijacked zombie ant blocking its jaws onto a leaf with no way out? Or is your behavior expanding your freedom and your future possibilities?
That is the real test of autonomy.
True freedom isn't just doing whatever you want in the moment. Following every biological impulse isn't freedom. It is literal slavery to your biology. True freedom is having the cognitive power to say no when your instinct, your anxiety, or a digital algorithm commands you to act.
Yep.
So ask yourself, is your strongest desire right now actually serving your long-term quality of life? Or is it just helping an ancient biological trait or a modern mimetic ideology propagate itself at your expense?
Wow. That is going to stay with me for a long time. The next time a retargeted ad follows me across the internet, I am going to stop and ask, am I feeding my life's goals or am I just feeding the algorithm? Before we sign off today, we want to strictly clarify that this entire discussion is meant to promote objective, independent, critical thinking. We are absolutely not criticizing or discriminating against any country, group, or people. We are simply unpacking the shared biological and psychological realities of the human condition.
Always important to state that.
Absolutely. And additionally, because we used a few market and business examples to explain structural thinking, please remember that we are not investment advisors. Any financial concepts mentioned are strictly for objective analysis and intellectual exploration.
Always do your own research, maintain your cognitive flexibility, and apply these mental models carefully to your own unique situations.
For sure. If you found today's brain debugging session valuable, we warmly encourage you to hit that subscribe button for Sip&Talk. We love having you in the community. And as always, we want to enthusiastically urge all of you to check out our old friend Mickey's YouTube channel. Search for Mickey to Life to see his absolute latest travel vlogs. He is out there exploring the world, expanding his own mental lattice, and the videos are just incredible.
Highly recommend checking Mickey's channel out. He always brings a great perspective.
Well, Sip&Talkers, that is all the time we have for today's show. Remember, you are the system admin of your own mind. Don't let the malware win. Sign off warmly until the next conversation. Have a great week, everyone.